Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second of the Rother Tree Hours, and we'll be starting very shortly. So this webinar is the second of the Rother Tree Hour webinars, and it's part of an initiative to build a community of tree champions caring for the Rother treescape as part of the Rother District Council's environment strategy. I'm Bridget Fox from the Woodland Trust, and we're delighted to be one of the partners in this initiative alongside the Bexhill Environmental Group, Friends of Coombe Valley, Dallington Forest Project, the High Weald AOMB, and of course, Rother District Council, who are hosting our event today. And today's talk will focus on and highlight the importance of tree establishment and aftercare after tree planting, using a pilot study from the city of Birmingham as an example. And delighted to say that Birmingham has recently been confirmed as one of the tree cities of the world. So I'm sure a lot of expertise to share. Our three speakers today are Simon Needle, who's the principal arboriculturalist at Birmingham City Council, joined by Mac McDermott and Steve Watson, who are two of the members of the Birmingham Tree People. Birmingham Tree People is a group of tree wardens and part of the National Tree Council network, and they act as the tree friends, ears and eyes for the Birmingham community and officers at Birmingham City Council. And we're delighted to have made this connection between Rother and Birmingham because all three speakers are acting as advisors on an MSc student placement that Rother District Council is hosting. A student from the University of Brighton received training and advice from our Birmingham colleagues, and we're all very grateful for their input. So we're looking forward to hearing from them shortly, and then there'll be a chance for your questions at the end before we wrap up at about 4 o'clock. Thank you very much, and over to our speakers for their presentation.
Hi, hopefully you can all hear us. My name's Mac. I'm one of the three Birmingham Tree People presenters today, as you can tell by our very spanky backgrounds. I don't know, is the presentation gone up? Or?
No, I'll pop it up now. So
thank you very much indeed.
Laura, can you just make me co-host so I can screen share?
You should be fine to share now.
Okay, it is now. There we go.
Brilliant.
Up now? There we go. Okay.
Yeah, just a bit of background about BTP first. Both the three of us are all original trustees of the organisation. We are a charitable incorporated organisation, registered as a charity. And just to give you a bit of background on what we're doing today. Today is obviously about tree establishment, and we've got here not tree planting. Everybody, every time you open a newspaper or listen to the news, another 1 million trees are being planted somewhere, and 1 million trees are not being cared for in each of those events. So we've been looking long and hard at how we might reverse this trend of increasing tree numbers and decreasing canopy cover. And Birmingham Tree People were contracted by Birmingham City Council in order to deliver the actual contract for two things. One's an urban forestry master plan, which I'm going to talk about for 10 minutes. And then Simon will speak, and then and Steve will speak at the end, focusing more and more as we go on the actual tree planting part of what we're doing. And we've got the Urban Forestry Master Plan, and we've also got the Citizen Science Project going, which is sponsored by Kia, who are the city's highway contractor on an interim contract as part of an original 25-year PFI. So just moving on, next slide. Thank you very much. You've already heard this. Obviously, we are a global tree city, one of the first in the UK. We adopted this very quickly. It was part of Birmingham's green credentials because we were already the UK's only biophilic city. So there are a number of green credentials that Birmingham is quite proud of. It's the largest metropolitan authority in Europe, geographically wise, and it's one of the greenest, which is surprising. So you'll see a picture later on of one of our favourite pictures of Birmingham. And you'll hopefully understand that why trees are so important to us. With biophilic city status and global tree city, it's at the forefront of most of the decision-making process. Next slide, please. So what is a master plan? This is to set the background. If you could imagine in your head a triangle, we're at the top of the triangle here, or the top of the pyramid with the plan, but it's being delivered from a ground up perspective. So it's being delivered by a third party organisation, which is Birmingham Tree People. We are the tree wardens, and obviously it's the first of its kind in the UK, and it's one of the first of its kind ever delivered by a charity, a community group. So it's unique in many ways. So some of the stuff we're going to talk to you about now is what is based on findings elsewhere in the world, and also the findings that we are discovering as we go. Sorry, I'm being put off a little bit because my picture appears to be Simon. Keeps smiling at me. But, great to see all of you here, by the way. I should have done that right from the start. Thank you very much for the introductions, and very much to Rother for inviting us to actually present here. And as I said, we've got some pictures of their staff in Birmingham a few weeks ago. So thank you very much again for just allowing us to be here. We, to give a bit of background, as I said, we were contracted to the city to deliver the master plan. And one of the outcomes of the master plan is clearly a tree planting strategy that makes some sense. We have got, originally 3 years ago, I think it was, a tasking group was set up by the city. And out of that tasking group came a number of policies that were agreed by city and written straight in that required the production of the master plan, and also the formation of a tree board and a few other policies that are quite what we consider to be cutting edge. And this is one of the first times we've had a chance to deliver on some of those projects, and again, under a contract basis. The next slide, please. So more about what the master plan is. If you can imagine that it is a destination and not a detailed route, we try and sell this as a picture in your head of where we will be in 40 or 50 years' time. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor because Simon's sharing, but bottom right-hand box, we're looking at master planning being 10 to 50 years. We're currently set it at around 30 to 40 years for our plan. That may change based on our consultations. But a tree strategy, and having written 3 tree strategies for 3 different local authorities in my career, all of which were majorly ignored, kind of a pointless exercise. The tree strategy is just done as an internal procedure. So it's done mostly by the city staff for the city or the local authority or whoever that might be. It's got a bit of a wish list going on. Doesn't take very long to write because they're all the same. They all mention the same things and say the same things, and obviously the wish list is much the same. And they don't have much of an implementation framework, and they only normally deal with the local authority's tree stock, whether that be parks or cemeteries or whatever, or streets. The master plan is much more ambitious. So we've got all the trees across the city, whether that be council trees, third sector trees, private NHS, could be the universities. We involve all of the stakeholders and not just those within the city itself. So we've already had our first workshop where it's the internal consultants were invited. So everybody with a stake in the city, a large portion of which were third sector. We try and develop a shared vision of where we're going to be in 50 years' time. And then normally we're in about 6 months into the writing of this year. And what BTP did was to actually contract Treeconomics. We had a look at the track record. There were no real other companies in the UK that specialise in these kinds of things. And we were lucky enough to get a guy called Cecil Kernan-Dyke, who's probably one of the world's leading urban foresters, who's been doing quite a bit of work for us. So that gives you an idea of what the master plan is in a very broad difference between a tree strategy. You can't have a tree strategy, which is the route to get there, unless you know where you're going. Next slide, please. Quick bit of background. It's the 2 circles on the left-hand side that I draw your attention to. With the globalisation of the everywhere, with 70% in 2050, we're probably going to say it's a lot more than that. We've already got 80% in cities in the UK already, but overall in the world, we're looking at this huge influx of people to cities away from rural areas. And the problem being that all those million tree planting campaigns that you see that affect Scotland don't really affect Birmingham. So 1 million trees planted on a glen in Scotland don't really do much for air quality in downtown Birmingham. So part of what we're looking at is how we're going to deal this within a built environment where it's so much harder to plant 1 million trees. Simon and Steve will talk about the numbers in Birmingham and why 1 million trees doesn't make any sense when we predict that's what we're going to plant. Next slide, please. So I did say that it's a destination, and of course to plot a route to a destination, you need to know where you're starting. Although I have to say this is probably not essential. You can start from anywhere. But ideally, if we're doing a plan, then we'll need to know where we are and what we're doing. So the state of our urban forests, so it's a gathering of data is what we've been undergoing for the last few months. What trees do we have? What condition are they in? Where do they exist? Who owns them? Then we've got to set a series of standards and benchmarks for how we look after the urban forest. And again, whether that is our own trees or private sector trees. We've got function and values of the trees, which we're currently going through at the moment, trying to put ecosystem service values and asset values into our trees to give us an idea and inform all the other players exactly what kind of money we're dealing with. So we already think that we've got about £15 billion worth of assets on the highway trees alone, but we're just recalculating all the figures to bring us up to date. And of course, the public outreach parties. What have we got with the third sector, with the city, and what do we want? So where are we is what we're measuring currently, and we're not doing too badly at all. Next slide, please. So where do we want to go? And this is just very quickly, basically, how we've set out that major master plan and how we're looking at collecting the information that the city thinks it's important. So we had a steering group. The three of us are kind of on there. There's a couple of others. Then we had the basic referencing point, which was city goals and ambitions. We were setting down what we wanted, and we'll look at the KPIs in a moment. We then conducted a big public workshop a couple of weeks ago with about 40 or 50 attendees, where we asked everybody about what do you think of what we've done? Do you think what we've set out so far makes any sense? Is it important? Is there anything else you want to see? And if we could only do one thing out of each of the themes, what would that be? So after the first public workshop, we then go back and we're currently in this middle of this list now with our master plan. So we're collecting the data from that first workshop and deciding on whether our KPIs look okay or not. We'll then go back with a draft revision and have a second workshop, which is more strategic, more reviews and comments, and then another public workshop at the very end to launch the draft strategy, which we're looking at maybe September, October, maybe a little bit later this year. Next slide, please, Simon. So the section on the right is those, this is actually from Kenny, which is a 2011 publication. We actually based our key performance indicators on a paper by Jim Clark from much longer before that, also published in the Urban Forestry Journal. And we've used the same kind of themes of the trees and the forest resource itself, community framework, which has got a lot more key performance indicators than you can see there, and then the resource side of it, and then we have themes. So we set these base, this is not the exact same document that we ended up with, and then we've gone out to consultation, we've produced our KPIs. From the KPIs, we've then got low, medium, high, and optimum outturns, how we can measure it. So this is setting the standards for how we will measure all of our performance indicators over the next 50 years. And then the return from the tree strategies, which is what comes next, will measure against how we're doing in our 50-year plan. The adaptive management, you've seen these pictures before. I stole these from Davey in Tree Economics. We have a nice circle, which is what do we have? What do we want? How do we get there? How are we doing? And we just go round and round and round. And the review process of how we're doing is the most important part. Next slide, please. Just want to change the plan a bit. Obviously, we've got all these beautiful master plan ideas and outcomes and measurements and KPIs. But as Mike Tyson wasn't particularly famous for notable sayings, but this is one that's attributed to him. I could have used many different ones he had. chicken and eggs and all sorts of stuff. But for the next slide, please. These green circles are the punch in the face. So we've got our master plan. That's our bit in the middle. Any of those green circles might be the punch in the face that stops us with our plan and makes us to reevaluate. The air quality, I think, for Birmingham has been a big one, top left. There's an awful lot of information going on, coming in and going out about what's happening with the inner ring road in Birmingham and how we're going to control air quality, which is possibly one of the world's biggest crises. But any one of these bits around the edge could be one of those bits that causes the plan to be rethought. And hopefully by the time we've got through all our themes, most of these things will be in hand and we'll be able to roll with a particular punch. Next slide, please. Just to hand it over, I think I've got my 10 minutes, yeah? The green arrow in the middle is mine, but you'll have seen the TDAG documents. These are quite commonly used in our industry nowadays. So we've just highlighted number 5, pick the right trees. That sounds so simple, so easy to do, and yet is so difficult to actually achieve. Birmingham has the longest running street tree planting program in the UK. Started in 1870, they planted 1,000 trees every single year, other than the war years, and yet we've still got a smaller tree canopy than we had in 1870. So picking the right tree, we need to think about what we're doing here. And as I hand over to Simon, who's got a lot more detail on that part of it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Mac. Thanks everybody for having us here. So just to run over a few bits of stats just from Birmingham in terms of trees. So within our bounds, we have somewhere over 1 million trees. And we've taken that data from the National Tree Map, which is a flyover of the city, which then plots tree crowns. And we've also had to estimate some as well, where you've got different levels of crown. So you've got understory trees and canopy trees. So somewhere over 1 million trees. Of these, around 250,000 are in private ownership. So we've got some major landowners such as Calthorpe Estates, Bourneville Village Trust, universities, but also private householders and other non-public lands, so industrial estates and the like. But of the trees under BCC management, we've got 137,000 or nearly 138,000 individually plotted trees in parks, cemeteries, schools, in our housing estates. And those trees are from a diverse range of backgrounds, so covering some 37 families and 81 genus. On the highway, though, so these are the trees that are within what we would call the highway maintainable at public expense. So it's basically the main carriageway and the footways on each side. So any grass verges that are there, we've got somewhere around 73 to 75,000 individual trees plotted. The reason why I'm being a little bit vague on that is we're just going through a process of remapping our public highway. So we're taking some new trees into account. And of course, we've had some losses over the years, and we've got some different highways infrastructure projects going on at the moment, which are accounting for some losses, but will have gains. But it's around that sort of figure. So quite a few. And if we compare that with the likes of, I think somewhere like Sheffield, where there was a lot of news about their street tree program up there, they had something, I think, about 30,000 or 34,000 at the start of that process. So we had more than double the trees on streets in Birmingham there. But the largest bulk of our trees are within woodlands. So we've got about 1,398 hectares of woodland across the city. And we've sort of averaged that out. So this gives us about 630,000 trees within woodlands. As Mac had already mentioned, we have sections of the city that are quite green. We also have some that aren't as green, especially where we get to the sort of inner city areas. But we have just over 13.5 square miles of public open spaces, 250 miles of rivers, brooks and streams, 35 miles of canals. And there are all those sorts of statements made about Birmingham, more trees than Paris, more miles of canal than Venice. They all have elements of truth, but there's also some urban myth in there as well. If we look at the size of Birmingham compared with Venice, we're a darn sight bigger than Venice. So should have more miles of canal. But as Matt was saying, this is about tree establishment and getting the right trees in the right place. So understanding that we've got these 70,000+ trees on the highway and that we're constantly having to remove some because they're reaching the end of their safe life expectancy within the highway, and we're replacing some, we need to make sure that we are putting the right trees in the right place and that they are establishing well, and try and learn from what trees do well in the urban environment, compare with which trees do less well, so we can, like I say, use that to inform our tree planting strategies going forward. Now, while our trees are on a 5-yearly survey programme for their health and safety, not much information has been gathered about those first formative years from establishment. And it's widely assumed that the early years, from years 5 to 10 after planting, are critical to the establishment of healthy urban street trees. Yet little's known about the factors or the relationships that ultimately contribute to the tree mortality or survival. So the project that we were doing with the tree people provides that context in which to understand how social, biophysical and neighbourhood design factors implement the establishment of street trees within the environment. So with that in mind, we were looking around for a set of survey criteria, and we came across the Birmingham Urban Forest Research Group in America, and they had this planted tree re-inventory protocol. Now, we've looked at that and we've found that actually it fitted most of what we wanted quite well. Now, that gave us an initial 41 variables in which to assess trees against. And Steve's going to come on to a little bit later about how that's been going and what learning we've had from undertaking the initial reviews in our rolling programme of survey on there. But you can see there's a lot of information there that we've been gathering about, or that we want to gather about newly planted trees. So we're looking at trees within the sort of first 5 years after planting, some of which we'll already have. So things like the tree ID and the location and species we'll already have. But we're looking to see how well the trees have grown. So taking on the additional information about diameter, how much they've grown, what sort of crown dieback or exposure they've got, trunk damage, which is a key one, which I'll mention in a bit, tree conditions, interference with the local environment or interference from the local environment, utilities, buildings, fences, road traffic, what the planting beds are like as well is crucial. So it's fine, we're planting trees in large, open, soft landscaped areas, but these are trees that are going into real hard landscapes, harsh environments. So how much space have they actually got to grow, and what are they competing with? Proximity to other trees, and evidence and management, and also community care as well. That's something that we don't see a lot of, but we do see examples of. So people actually taking some care of the trees that are out front of their house. As we're obviously we're here, the Birmingham Tree People, which is our tree warden group, we were looking to them to do some of the initial data gathering on this. We'll do the data gathering, and we were looking for a group of volunteers with which to do this. So we thought we'd start off running through these criteria by doing a sample. So we looked at how many street trees have been planted over the last 10 years. We got the data from our partners Kia, and we had 11,800 street trees planted in that last 10 years. So that was rather too many to look at in one go. So we chose to look at trees planted in the last 5 years, and we also chose one ward out of all the wards in the city to look at. So we trained up 6 volunteers to go through these variables. We were lucky enough in between the lockdowns of the COVID pandemic to get an opportunity for us to be actually out on the street doing some of this training. But like I said, we chose one ward, but it still gave us 260 trees that have been planted in the last 10 years to look at. So from that initial data collected, that showed some interesting results as far as we were concerned as city officers. But obviously more data is going to be needed and analysis needed, which is something we're working on there. These trends that we were seeing are reflected across the city. Of those 260 trees that were initially surveyed, 95 were from rosaceae families. So we had to think about how that's going to fit with the existing tree species composition. Will that decrease our long-term resilience if this trend continues? So if we overplant those ACD, are we opening ourselves up to issues with future pests and diseases? 33 of those trees were dead or in poor condition for one reason or another. But 82, which was perhaps the most concerning, so a third of those had lower trunk damage. And that's the sort of thing that's mainly associated with strimmer damage by our grounds maintenance contractors when they're doing their clearing around obstacles before they send the mowers in. So that's not good at all, because if we're damaging these trees early on in the establishment, they're not going to establish as quickly. They're not going to thrive. They may not grow to their full potential. They may die prematurely. So this was where Steve and the other volunteers are coming in, gathering all this additional data to see whether we've got these as a major trend or not. So as we said there, we're continuing to roll with that survey, roll out a survey to the other wards, and we're going to be refining that analysis as we go. And that information is going to be used to inform the urban forest strategy and our tree planting plans. And the picture there just illustrates, really, I suppose, what sort of conditions trees are having to put up with people insisting on parking right on top of them. So I'm going to give Steve a bit more time to go through his bits and pieces. I've rattled through that. So I'm going to hand over to Steve now to tell you a little bit more about how we're rolling out the programme and what it's like having to work with all these volunteers and gather the data and work out where we're going to be surveying. Steve, over to you.
Hello, good afternoon to you. So presumably you can hear me. I'll make that assumption anyway. So here we are in a part of Birmingham called Wheely. In fact, Wheely Castle, which is an old castle, so they say. Probably it was just a house. Anyway, so we have Rother people there. So we have your tree officer on the left, and we've got Mr. Robinson, Mr. Bob Robinson in the middle, and that is my handsome self with elegant profile on the right-hand side. So we're teaching these two characters how we do the protocol. Obviously, they know quite a bit about trees already, so it's a little bit artificial, but it was good fun anyway. So I have 3 children, and I wanted to have a 4th one, but my wife said, well, you didn't look after the first 3, so you can't have a 4th. So I think that's about what we're trying to do with the trees. I've now got 5 grandchildren, and I can say to my same 3 children, saying, well, give me some more grandchildren, so then I can get all the accolades without the nappies. So I think what we're trying to do with trees is to go beyond the tree planting and making sure that as far as possible, we can help their survival. Next slide, please. So Birmingham is quite a big place. So on the right-hand side there, we've got our famous tree canopy map there, and the dark green bits there are where we've got lots of tree canopy, and the grey bits are less so. So the city is quite diverse in this map. So there are some very leafy bits and some less leafy bits as well, and we'll be doing that whole lot. And the data has gone down from the 73,000 trees which we've got on the streets down to 11,800 or so that was done in the last 5 years, and the last 10 years, and we're restricting that to the years of 2015 to 2020, and that gives us about 5,500 spread over the left-hand side. And the green bits on the left-hand side is where we have deployed some of our tree inspectors, numbering around 33 at the moment that we've trained and got engaged with their high-vis jackets and a tape measure. And eventually we'll spread ourselves over the whole city. The area is quite big because it's about 18 miles north to south and about 9 miles east to west in various dimensions. So it's not a walking area. And so we have to deploy our volunteers such that they can actually carry it out. So the survey is really based around the tree itself, the place where the tree is, the maintenance of that tree, and the community involvement. And it varies quite a bit around the city that we've observed so far. So after we did our pilot study, we introduced a new variable, which was to do with congestion. So I think they were going to generate an awful lot of data here out of these exercises. It'll probably take us a year or so to do it. And I think there's a PhD at least in examining and analysing this data to try and give us an answer about what can we do to protect our children, I mean the trees, not our grandchildren, from harm. But I think also that it's going to be less biologist and more an actuary to work out what the statistical trends are. So we look forward to that aspect of it. Can we have the next slide, please? So we've got the 40 wards that we have to try and deploy all our trees in. So we've got a list of trees from Kia of the 5,500 they want us to look at. And it's just a list of 5,500 trees telling us whereabouts they are in the wards. So the wards go from 2015, where we had a different way of running the city, from 2018, when we had all sorts of boundary changes. So it's a pretty confused geographic situation of where are these 5,500 trees. So on the left-hand side there, we've got the Hansworth pilot study. That's the 260 that Simon mentioned earlier on. And that's spread into the roads. So where I've marked the roads in orange, that's where we've got a street tree over Hansworth Wood, which varies from very, very tight terraced housing through to some very suburbia up in the north area there. So each of those trees were then deployed to our 6 surveyors in our pilot study, and that took us about a couple of months. We started in August of last year, and we finished in the early autumn. And out of that came some interesting results. Surprising one would be, well, there'd be 3 surprising ones. One is the amount of litter that we found, that even if they didn't harm the tree, they didn't help the community spirit. Then we had one where there was quite a lot of damage to the tree itself at the lower end, which we think is a lot of it's to do with strimmer damage, not intentional, but it's easy if you run a strimmer to get just too close to the plant. And the third one was parking congestion. So you've already seen one photograph of a car close to the tree, and I'll show you some more later on, because that's quite a disturbing aspect of it. So the way that we do the planning, or used to do the planning, is that we get the list of the street trees by ward, and then literally we take out the A to Z and find out where these streets are, and try and divide the ward up into chunks of manageable trees to survey. And that's about plus or minus 30 for each of the surveyors. We don't want to put them off, because 30 takes them a fair bit of time as they get to know it. But we do have some of the surveyors who are well into 150 plus trees that they've now surveyed, and they get a lot of pleasure and entertainment out of it. So what the unfortunate thing is that the UK street is not organised by chunks. So all the streets are all over the place, rather than, say, in the States, where we've got a grid system of north and east. So it's quite a tedious business to go through the A to Z and find out where streets are, especially when you've got several streets called High Street and things like that. Then I also would drive around this area, and I've lived in Birmingham for 33 odd years now, and I thought I knew some of the areas, but it turns out I only knew the pubs. So driving around has been very interesting for me personally, just to see what is this city like. And there's some very, very beautiful parks, big, wide avenues, lots and lots of really mature trees, and that's been quite a lot of fun. So we've got all our surveyors to try and manage, and we've got a diversity of surveyors that go from undergraduates at the University of Birmingham through to some very senior citizens. And we have to carefully manage what they want to do, because they're not necessarily mobile with transport. So we try and adapt to each surveyor's desires to help out. And that takes a little bit of time to get that done there. So we give them the trees that we want to survey in a shared spreadsheet using Google Drive or famous Excel and so on. And they have community access to this spreadsheet. However, we've had practical concerns about the data security. Flatly, what happens if somebody overwrites the data accidentally, and that can be right a problem. And there's also been a technical muddle about where are these spreadsheets? Are they on the OneDrive? Are they on the Google Drive, or are they on the Whisk Drive? So that's been a little bit of a problem. But we are in the process of moving forward to a lot more sophistication using some software called Tree Plotter. This Tree Plotter software, which you can see on the top right there, that's a map of an area called Soho in Birmingham, not in London. And it's a sophisticated program. I'm taking a little bit of time to learn how to use it. And I have a long wish list of things that I'd like it to do. Now, this wish list is probably different for Simon and Mac, because they're more interested in the arboricultural side of it, to do fancy graphs and charts and so on. Whereas myself, I'm just really interested in avoiding the A to Z. So down the bottom there, we can take the map, and this is the trees out of the 5,500 there that are in Soho. Soho has only got 76 trees of the 5,500, and that's the lowest number of trees to survey in any one of our 40 wards. But there are over 200 trees that are street trees in Soho, so there hasn't been a fantastically huge recent planting plan in Soho. So I want to deploy my surveyors, and we're going to have 3 surveyors in this particular ward, and I can use a tool in Tree Plotter to outline the trees that I want. So you see I've got 3 areas there, strangely called north, east and south. And within there, I will try and see whether I can get the trees to be around the 20 to 30 mark there. So then I will export these trees to a spreadsheet, and that effectively will be my works instruction to my surveyors, such that please go out and survey these trees and bring back the data. And they're very much autonomous. They go out either in pairs or on their own to work in their patch. Where we're trying to then move to is that they will fill in the data. At the moment, they fill it in on the communal spreadsheet with all those little bit of the problems there. But it may well be that we can put it into these exported data, and then through the magic of database manipulation and management, we can import that same data back into Tree Plotter by the flick of a thumb, so to speak, there. So I'm looking forward to that. And then finally, on the technology side, Kia have been very kind to find us 6 tablets such that we can import the data whilst we're out there in the field. I think that would be enough, because many of our surveyors will probably not want to get involved with such technology. And if they're like me, then they struggle with the television, let alone with the tablet. So that's where we're at with the data at the moment. We've got 13 wards that we're out there as we speak being surveyed, and I think that we'll be moving out to other parts of the city as more and more volunteers ring us up or email us and say, can we come and play? And that's where we're going to go. Next slide, please. Okay, 3 photographs which are not nice photographs. They're sort of Tree Plotter porn, if you like. On the left-hand side, this is one just around the corner from me. That was a perfectly healthy tree. It was only planted a few months ago, and it's been vandalized. So that's one of the interventions that are happening to cause the death of these trees, is that tree has been now removed. Reported it to Kia, and within the space of a couple of days, it was removed because it doesn't look good in the community. The one in the middle is one that was a major success story, not just yesterday, which was a bank holiday, you may remember. I can't prove it, but I think this white van has pushed over this brand new tree that's been planted in December of 2020, and the stakes were all wobbly. It's a very, very nice lime tree. So I reported to Kia that this tree stakes had been pushed over at 2 p.m. yesterday afternoon, and they'd fixed it by 3 p.m. So I'm going to give them a public applause for doing a great job on a bank holiday. And then the third one on the right-hand side there is what I'm going to call Fear. This is a street, which is quite a wide street, but you'll notice the 2 cars are very much parked on the pavement, very close to this poor unfortunate tree. That's because this street is used as a racetrack. And this brings us to a point of the study, the analysis would be, is going to be human behavior. Why are they choosing to impact badly on the tree. And this particular factor is fear. They don't want their cars smashed into, so they park on the pavement to the detriment of the public footpaths. But I don't know what we're going to do about that, but if we can identify it and prove it statistically, then maybe we can get the council members to actually think about it more on the green agenda. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for listening. This is one of the most beautiful views in Birmingham. This is out of the Edgbaston Golf Club and was probably what the early Victorians decided would be their legacy. This is a fantastic view down the 9th tee of Edgbaston Golf Club. Lots of lovely trees, and it's a beautiful place to walk around. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. So, and thank you to all three of you for a really interesting presentation. I found a lot to enjoy in that, and a really interesting mix, I think, as a vision, but also practical know-how. Interesting to hear the mention of Sheffield, which of course was in the news for all the wrong reasons, but has now become something of a good news story. I'm glad to say more recently, but Birmingham has had that long history of investing in its street trees and hopefully looking after them. And certainly, I think from the Woodland Trust point of view, you very much endorse that message about having the right tree in the right place and also with the right plan to protect and maintain them. So I'm turning to our colleague Laura to help me here with questions. And I see there are already some questions been posted in both the chat and the Q&A. Let me have a look. So in the chat section, we've had a question. If I can find it, I thought I saw one.
There was one which said
yes,
about a veteran
about
tree.
Lovely, yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah, so from Doug, a lovely veteran tree shown in one of the earlier slides. Roughly, what is the proportion of your trees that are veteran or ancient? And
that is a very good question, and one that I think we need to gather the data on. In terms of the highway tree stock, we do have an age classification that would pick that up. There's not anything on our highways that I would say is ancient. We've certainly got some veteran trees. Some of those will be in areas sort of more towards the east of the city, where we've got some of the big sort of boulevards of oaks, which are former parts of the old field boundaries and the old country road layout, but they are on very much broad verges. We do have ancient trees within some of our woodland areas. So the picture that was up at the end there, the Edgbaston Golf Course, that's been laid out as a golf course for 100 and something odd years now. So that incorporates some veteran trees, and we've got some in places like Sutton Park, which has been a public park now. It's been given over to the public by Henry VIII. So there's woodland there that's been going back centuries. So, but it's something that we need to do more on. I think is identify those trees.
Brilliant. And I should at this point make a plug for the ancient tree inventory, which is hosted by my organisation, the Woodland Trust. I've just put a link to that in the chat for them that's interested. And that's an opportunity all of us nationwide can to map those ancient and veteran trees, which is a slightly separate exercise from the kind of universal tree mapping we're talking about today. So a question from Samantha, who asks, how much do your volunteers have to know about trees to carry out their duties? Can you briefly run through what they have to do? I think we had a sense of that and some great action photos, but I don't know if you want to go through in a bit more detail.
Matt, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, thank you very much, I will. All of the volunteers, we originally drew the pool expecting the volunteers to come from our training program. We've been running a training program for 6 or 7 years. Pitch is about level 3. So a lot of our tree wardens have been coming repeatedly once a month to 4-hour sessions on all aspects of urban forestry and tree care. When we launched the volunteer program for the street tree project, most of the volunteers came in fresh. They didn't come from our batch of trained. So we offered training specifically for the survey itself. However, training has formed the actual backbone of everything that we do with the Birmingham tree people. Some of these guys know a lot more about structural pruning and formative pruning of young trees than any tree officer I've ever met. Sorry about that, Simon. And I'm including myself as a tree officer in this one, yeah. So we do take the training side of things quite seriously. It's one of those things as a municipal arborist, we do know that it's often frowned on with volunteers because they don't know much. That's most certainly not the case in Birmingham. So these guys are usually got a good background in training, and they're specifically trained for the data outputs for the street tree survey as well. Hope that helped.
Brilliant. We've also got some early questions that came in. So the first one was while you were talking, Mac, on where can your leaflets be acquired from?
Yeah, I think I saw that question from David. Yeah, David Dennis, but I wasn't sure what leaflets he was referring to. Anything? Was it something specific? Did we miss? Is David on? Can he?
Well, I'm sure he'll clarify in either the Q&A or the chat for us. So while we wait for that, from Stephen Hardy, do you have an adopt a tree as part of your outreach to businesses and the public?
I'll say not yet. Not formally. We currently work with a project. Well, we work with the Birmingham Civic Society. They have a project called Birmingham Trees for Life that have been running since 2006, and do tree planting mainly in the parks areas. They have done sponsorship schemes and have worked with businesses. So we've done a lot of work with people like Deutsche Bank, Lloyds Bank, and a few of the other big companies where they have funded tree planting. But for individual trees on the highway, not yet, although there are a couple of schemes that may be coming forward on that basis. Big issue that we have is that we need to fund the maintenance of new trees on the highway, and that doesn't come from grants, and that's often prohibitive for people who want to sponsor costs. So that's something we need to tackle.
We currently, can I speak to the same thing? We currently have an agreement in principle with Kia that if we can cover the capital cost of the planting, which may come from some of the new treescape grants that are coming out, adopt a tree, sponsor a tree, we will have to cover the maintenance for the first 6 years, because that's obviously the item within Kia that costs. So if we can cover the capital of the tree and the planting, then we'll have to worry about if we expand the number of assets in the highway, we'll also have to cover the actual maintenance of it. I'll have to say establishment.
Yeah, I have to say our highways department expect 30 years worth of maintenance funds up front, not 6.
Yes,
so
that's something we often run into when we're encouraging people to support local tree planting. They often say to us, well, why is it my local authority charges so much more for a tree than just the cost of the tree? And it is that lifetime maintenance cost. And we've seen, and there's examples from Steve, how much practical work is needed often to keep trees safe in the urban realm, sadly, with all the environmental challenges.
There was a comment from Dean Bell as well. I think it's something that we just need to pick up outside of the meeting. So I've made a note of his email address, so I'll pass that on. It's easier than we'll have a conversation during there.
Brilliant, Dean. Thanks very much for that. Laura, our next question.
Yeah, we've got another one saying that your statistics show a high number of trees damaged from strimming. Does Birmingham allow grass, etc., to grow up against young trees rather than keeping their roots clear of competition? And that's from Malcolm Turner.
Good thing. So this is one of the things we're looking at the moment, and hopefully this information is going to feed in. Currently, when the trees are first planted, they are mulched around with a wood mulch, but obviously we're trying to minimise the use of pesticides, so trying to avoid spraying around trees. But I think this is one of the disbenefits of long-term cuts to local funding, local authorities. The fact that we often have to rely on contracted in staff, temporary staff, and they just get given a strimmer and they go along, and it's, best in the world. It's a bit of a mindless task, and I wouldn't want to do it. And if more care was exerted, it would be easier. I mean, once the tree gets established, a bit of grass around the base is not going to be too much of an issue. But I think we're going to look to see how we go forward with our highways contract and see if we can change over to having more longer term mulching around these younger trees and keeping the grounds maintenance team away from those. I will say that we sort of calculated what that cost would be to the city for all the damage to the trees if we multiplied it up across all 40 wards, and we come to something like around £3 million to if we have to replace those trees. So it's something we really do have to take seriously and are working forward on. But yeah, ideally they'd keep the trimmers away from there, but
these issues are challenges for every local authority, aren't they? Perhaps we could bring in Bob and Christina from Rother now to share how, I'm putting you on the spot, guys, but how your council is addressing these issues. And I see a comment that resonates with me about having more wildflower verges, and it seems to me that having less pavement parking and more sustainable drainage and wildflower verges might be a bit of a win-win here. But perhaps we can ask Christina and Bob to tell us how Rother is approaching the vexed issue of verges, if you know.
Thank you very much, Bridget. Yes, I mean, the reason why we are here today is because obviously our Birmingham colleagues are kindly supervising or co-advising Bob on his MSc placement. So Bob is an MSc student at Brighton University, and we are trying to address this issue. We are a district council, so therefore we can try to address this issue at our local green spaces and parks that are managed by Rother District Council. So in contrast to our Birmingham colleagues, we are currently looking at surveying trees and recently planted trees in those spaces as opposed to looking at street trees. But we are hoping to engage with East Sussex Highways as well to possibly progress this initiative further.
Brilliant.
Bob, you've been to Birmingham last week, and you had a training on the protocol and the method of surveying those recently planting trees. How did you find it?
I did, yes. It was a great experience. I think really seeing the knowledge and expertise and enthusiasm of the Birmingham tree lot was very inspirational. My first real introduction to the tree reinventory, I think it's excellent in the way that the Birmingham tree people have adapted it. I won't say it's idiot-proof, but it's definitely user-friendly. And I think with any experience going into it, you before long you'd be up and running. And I think bringing in things like the tree plotter, because half the game is locating the correct tree, and working in cooperation with that software, it will be very efficient. And yeah, I think they're paving the way for what's going to be laid out, hopefully, across all local authorities. And myself, working with Christina in Rother District Council, we're still early into our project, but I'm looking forward to getting the raw data and trying to get some analysis of it and seeing what my input can be. And hopefully that can feed back into the Birmingham tree guys, and we can work together and as this develops.
We are hoping to train the local community as well, the local volunteers, if they would be interested in the method to help us survey these trees in the future.
That's brilliant. Well, this hour has flown past. Thank you so much to everyone with all their questions and comments. And as ever, we've had more questions and comments we've had time to answer. But those of you who were at last month's webinar will have seen, hopefully, on the Rother website that we have not only a recording of the webinar, but also answers to some of the questions, including those we didn't get to live. And I hope it will be the same again after this webinar. So don't feel your question will have gone unanswered. And I think before I formally thank and wrap up, perhaps we just have a quick word from Christine about next month's session.
Yes, so the next 3-hour webinar will be on the 4th of May, which is first Tuesday of the month again. It's going to be 3 to 4. The topic is going to be ancient and veteran trees. So obviously the topic of today's webinar and the topic of last month's webinar was mainly focused on urban trees and urban forest management, whilst the ancient and veteran trees can be more found within the rural parts of Rother district. So that'll be next month, and the speakers will be Tom Reed, who is Citizen Science Officer at Woodland Trust, and one of our long-standing tree wardens. So that'll be Doug Edworthy, who is tree champion for Brightling and Dallington Parish Councils.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, he's a great guy. Obviously, I would say that being from the Woodland Trust myself, but we're delighted to be partners in this endeavour, and really inspiring to hear from Birmingham what can be done. Thank you for joining us, guys, by the magic of Zoom. And I think those images of people out and about enjoying trees and interacting with trees on your city streets and giving us all something to look forward to after lockdown, and with Bob's experience to share, I'm sure it won't be long before Rother is joining you in these endeavours. So thank you all very much indeed. I look forward to Laura, as ever, for your expert facilitation, without which this could not happen, and Christina for putting this programme together. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to joining you again next month. Okay, enjoy the spring. Thank you all so much.
Thanks very much. Bye.